horrible timer. I'll tell you, most of the problems with stretching that I find in the clinic are because people just aren't stretching long enough. Stretching is boring. It's boring. I get bored doing it. No one's really holding their stretches long enough. One of the biggest things I'll tell people is we want to get a long enough stretch to stretch all the tissues we're talking about. If we don't put a load on tissues, whether it be the hamstrings, the quadriceps, the calves, we won't make any difference in the length of tissue, okay? So one of the big things I'll do, and my patients hate it, they absolutely hate when I do this, and I do this to adults too, adults and kids, is I put a timer down, I'll do 30 seconds or a minute, set the timer, and I'll say, don't stop the stretch until that timer is done. And that is the most frustrating thing. It's as if I was putting them in on fire. They are just so bored. But to keep that sustained pressure, we want to make sure we have pressure at end range. What does that mean? Total, the thing they call it is total time at end range. And that means that when we're trying to do a stretch, we want to get the joint, let's say I'm stretching my finger here. Now this isn't a tight finger, but the example is good. So you're going to apply pressure like so. Okay, so we're stretching all these structures right here. And we're holding a stretch at end range. That's where the stretch and the magic, I know it's corny, magic occurs. We want to have a sustained pressure through those tissues to create elongation, okay? And depending on the structure we're trying to stretch, we have skin, fascia, muscle, tendon, ligaments. All those structures require a degree of tension through them to have a lengthening of the tissue. Now realize, I don't expect stretching to be completely comfortable. I mean, you're really causing some micro tears in an effort to gain length. Now, post-surgical stretching, we always talk about scar tissue and things like that, but even just non-injured stretching requires a degree of tearing, micro tears, small little tears, little inflammation, and a lengthening of tissue, okay, to get that extra length and adapt to it. And so what do we need to do? So what's the key? All right, the key is the studies show 3 times for 30 seconds. So you're holding that total end range time where it can't go any further for 30 seconds 3 times. And the studies that were done on the calf. They did calf studies, and they found there was a big difference between holding shorter duration stretches. For me, I'll even go upwards of a minute. I'll say let's do 2 times per minute if we're trying to isolate out one particular area. I do like yoga stretching and combined movements. Let's say this growth stretching like this, okay? But sometimes you need isolated stretching. When you're doing that full body motion in yoga stretch, you're trying to stretch, the whole chain, the hip flexors, the lower back and such. You can't isolate out that segment. So I love yoga for stretching, but if you have a focal area, like your hamstrings are really tight, your calf is really tight, you want to really focus on that particular segment, okay, to make a difference in how you feel and to really change that particular segment. Because a lot of times you'll go and move more through the segments of your body that are looser, and you won't isolate that area that you need to stretch. So it's total time at end range. That's all you have to think, total time at end range, that you want to get that sustained stretch. The timer is your friend. If you're not seeing gains in range of motion, you're probably not holding it long enough. And it is hard to commit to that, and it is downright boring. And this is called static stretching, okay? There's dynamic stretching where you're warming up things, which is different. You're taking your body through a series of movements, arm rolls like that, gently overhead motions, maybe jogging in place, knees to chest. That's a dynamic warm-up, and that should be done after like 5 minutes of like warming up, like a light jog or so. Then you do your dynamic stretching, and then your program. Then at the end of practice or the end of your workout, that's when you should start doing those static stretches where you're holding it for periods of time. But you must hold that stretch for a good minimum 30 seconds to see a change in length. What I'll tell people is I want you to feel like a firm amount of pressure, like solid, sustained pressure, but we don't want to hit a home run is where we don't see the best gains. It's my patients that give good pressure. They're very consistent. They do it almost every day. And they put a little bit of pressure, but they don't kill it. They don't try and bounce. They don't try and get, horrifically, severely painful stretches. That will cause more inflammation than we want, and can actually delay your progress. You have that. We're talking about a little bit of inflammation in the muscle bellies, tendons, and such. So consider that when you're doing your stretches, that your goal is to slowly increase that length. It's better tolerated. It won't affect your performance later on. If you are really feel like you have to do those static stretches before competition, there's this whole issue about doing the stretches I'm talking about before competition. Quite frankly, you're not all of a sudden going to get really flexible hamstrings by stretching very aggressive static stretches, the ones I described, before competition. You will loosen up some other structures, don't get me wrong, but realize the dynamic stretching, warming things up, getting those muscles to fire at the right time for a particular activity is more important than doing a static stretch at that time. At least that's my opinion. You will see some pros, they'll show trainers and such doing static stretching at the start of competition. Listen, the evidence is mixed. There's some people that believe that static stretching is not going to cause a decrease in performance, okay? But right now, I'd probably stick to the dynamic stretch. You're probably not going to have an enormous gain in length of tissue just by doing the before competition. And I do believe that if you're really pounding on a muscle and you're really aggressively stretching, you're probably more apt to hurt yourself, especially in the immediate few minutes after doing that. So if you're going to do a high jump, doing a very ballistic movement, you stretch, and you immediately go out there, you're probably, putting the muscle at a little bit of a disadvantage. The muscle, the contractile element, is the one that's at a little disadvantage at that point in time. Okay, if there's a delay, maybe say a half hour, said, Tom, I really want to do these stretches. I want to do it around the day of competition. You may want to give it a half hour to an hour before that point, and then do dynamic stretching just prior to competition. But anyway, static stretches 3 times for 30 seconds. That's kind of the mantra. It's been around for a while. The research shows that. I probably go upwards of a minute. Use the timer. Everyone hates it, but it'll keep you honest. Okay, 30 seconds is a long, boring time. You can almost fall asleep with it. It's important to get that. So remember, total time at end range, boring. To get the stretches, it's not exciting, not supposed to be, but hopefully you get the goals you want to be reached. Okay, have a great day. Hope this helps you out.